Tonight, Anne Rice's first novel, Interview with the Vampire, comes to the big screen, and if audiences like it as much as the author and the critics do, it should be a major hit.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel where I talk about books, TV series, and anything I find interesting. Today, I'm super excited to dive into the Interview with the Vampire written by Anne Rice. I've always loved the books and the movie, so when AMC announced a TV series a few years ago, I got really excited. I've always been fascinated with comparing books to their screen adaptations ever since I was a kid, so today, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. We're going to see if the show stays true to the heart of the characters. But first, just to clear the air, I know there are quite a few differences that fans and the writers from the show have talked about, so I'm going into this with an open mind, knowing this adaptation will be of its own unique spin. But before we dive in, let's talk about the vampires Anne Rice brought to life and how they influenced modern media.
Mrs. Rice. Mrs. Rice, seeing how you're a writer of the supernatural, I'm curious as to what your opinion is in pop culture of supernatural and horror specifically.
Vampire is one of the most flexible and deeply romantic figures you can use in pop culture, and as everybody knows, really fine vampire stories and movies tend to be much larger than their parts. I mean, look at Dracula. You know, there are endless ways to do Dracula, and Interview with the Vampire, for me, was a door to reality. So I'm a great respecter of the vampire in popular art.
They're known for their mystifying style, sensitive feelings, and deep introspection. When the book was published, the New York Times would once say, "Because Rice identifies with the vampire, the horror is the realization that the monster is within the reader themselves. Her vampires are loquacious philosophers who spend much of their eternity debating the nature of good and evil." In 1994, Interview with the Vampire would hit the big screen and change everything. These vampires didn't just walk, they would strut, transforming the industry into the iconic era of the sensitive vampire. Let's be honest, without Lestat, we wouldn't have characters like Klaus Mickelson. Anti-villains who indulge in a lifestyle that one lifetime could never fully grasp. They accept being damned and they're content living as predators. And in contrast, without Louis, we wouldn't have our sparkly sad boy Edward Cullen. Both are anti-heroes who indulge in self-condemnation and seethe in masochism. And without Anne Rice, we wouldn't have these iconic creatures that make us both empathize and contemplate our own mortality. So, in the spooky season of 2022, Anne's work would hit the big screen once again, this time in the form of a TV series. Now that we have a brief understanding of the kind of vampires Anne wrote, let's dive into Season 1, Episode 1 in throes of increasing wonder. As we begin, let's start off with some differences at first glance. The show kicks off with a 50-year time jump from when Louis and Daniel first met in San Francisco back in 1973. In the book, Daniel does become a vampire at some point, but he's not turned by neither Lestat or Louis. On the other hand, in the show, he becomes a successful yet controversial writer. One day, he gets a package from Louis with a letter and some cassette tapes. Daniel is visibly shaken while listening to the tapes from their last encounter. In the letter, Louis asks to meet again for another interview. In the show, Louis is a Creole pimp living in the 1910s, which is quite different from being a plantation owner in the 18th century. In the book, Louis is new money who purchased an indigo plantation. He would lose his father, making him step up as the oldest son to provide for the family. During this time, when the U.S. is becoming its own country and one of the biggest revolutions is happening across the ocean in France. Whereas in the show, being a person of color as well as a pimp in New Orleans during the Jim Crow era, Louis gets a front row seat to the city's darker side. He will see councilmen and other higher-ups indulging in hidden lifestyles while keeping up appearances during the day. They would anoint him a thin veil of respect, but don't hesitate to remind him of his place in society. Now, let's talk about Louis and Paul's relationship. In the 1994 film, Louis wouldn't lose his brother, leading him to become a depressed drunk. Instead, the movie states he lost his wife and daughter during childbirth. In the book, the death of Paul would be the main reason Louis didn't want to live anymore. He goes on to say how much he loved his brother. He would strive to make him happy. Though Louis was skeptical of religion for himself, he would eventually go on to build a small chapel to support Paul's practice. Paul would go on to see visions, believing he was a prophet. His purpose was to bring order and peace to the people of France as the revolution was beginning. Prayer is all that mattered to him. Prayer and his leather-bound Lives of the Saints, referencing the Bible. As in both the book and the show, Louis mentions that his brother would spend most of his time in church talking to God. This scene, while they're walking down the street, laughing, playing, and talking, while Louis reflects on his brother, is both stunning and touching. The show nailed the depiction of Paul and Louis' relationship. Moving on to Louis and Lestat's introduction to each other. In the show, they would meet while Louis is still human, unlike in the book where Lestat is a total stranger. I actually love this change. Dare I say, I prefer this version. In the book, Louis first encounters Lestat when he's unknowingly attacked by him, stumbling home drunk. Louis sees Lestat for the first time while dying from being drained. He would go on to describe Lestat's aura as the most overwhelming thing he'd ever experienced as a human being. Whereas in the show, Louis meets Lestat and forms a friendship, which really showcases how captivating Lestat's presence is. It's a mixture of compulsion, love, indulgence, and leisure. Lestat becomes obsessed with Louis almost at first sight. This is portrayed in the show when Louis is first introduced, retelling the tale of being human. Lestat stands there as if he just got off the boat straight from France. He's even holding his little blue book, which is an old version of a passport. Lestat's love for Louis is not mentioned in the book Interview the Vampire, but it is mentioned in Anne's second book, The Vampire Lestat, in its epilogue. He would go on to say, "I fell fatally in love with Louis, a young, dark-haired Beauvoir planter, graceful of speech and fastidious of manner, but I loved him, plain and simple." The show subtly displays Lestat's love and compulsion throughout the first episode. Here are more examples of how the show keeps the essence of their relationship while executing it differently. 1. Being at the brothel with Lily. Lestat telepathically talks to Louis while holding intense eye contact, muting everything around them. Another is at the poker game. He does the same thing, but switches the cards in Louis' favor. But my personal favorite example is when Lestat meets Louis' family. This scene not only shows Lestat's intensity, but it's also a moment Lestat is confronted with two things: his former human self and God, all in the form of Paul. Lestat loved God as a human, and his outburst at Paul is based on some facts from the book. In The Vampire Lestat, he mentions his love for the monastery, its cleanliness, and the order it brings him. He wanted to become a priest and devote his life to God, but his fathers and brothers would eventually rip him out of the church and forbid him from attending. Once home, Lestat's family, except for his mother, would ridicule, dismiss, undermining his achievements. This would make Lestat feel vindictive about life, beginning his interest in theater, music, and the arts. In the show, this love for the finer things is shown when he shops at night buying extensive literature, clothes, furniture, and even going to the opera. There's even a foreshadowing of money being wired in from France. After dinner with Louis' family, while they walk the streets, Lestat addresses his outburst and calls Louis out for lying to his family about his distaste for the opera. Paul would come up in the conversation, and Lestat asks Louis if he envies Paul. This question would puzzle Louis, and he would respond with, "He thinks the birds speak to him. Why would I envy that?" Lestat would say, "Well, he has liberty over his thoughts. No matter how misshapen they may be, your brother has no shame in sharing them." This snippet of dialogue is mentioned in the book, but it's coming from Louis' inner monologue. They would soon arrive at Lestat's townhouse, where he invites Louis in with a gift, and that gift being Lily, and they go inside. As they're inside, they would have intimate moments, which I'll refer to as the un petit coup, involving Louis getting a taste of Lestat's blood for the first time. Now let's dive into The Last Sunrise. In the book, Louis has a moment of awareness, acknowledging his final morning as a human. He spends his last moments with his sister, watching her sleep and fidget with the shawl placed upon her by Lestat from the night before. Louis enjoys his last soak in the sun through the windows, looking at the shadows cascade off the trees, feeling the rays on his skin and taking in its glow. It's a somewhat peaceful goodbye to the sun. But, in the TV show, Louis' last sunrise is purposely symbolic. It's poetically placed in the development of Louis' character, showing his wish to die and to be eternally punished. Louis kinda says it in the show. That was the last sunrise I ever saw, perhaps the kindest thing the dark gift has given me. I don't miss the sun, nor the reminders it carries. How Paul dies in the book is the same as in the show. The only difference is that Louis and Paul were arguing leading up to his death, whereas in the show, it's a tender moment between brothers. As the night fades away, the sky goes from deep blues and transform into violets. The clouds become a vibrant pink, and as dawn approaches, Louis and Paul banter while climbing to the roof. Paul mentions everything he ate, from the boudin, green beans, dirty rice, to chocolate cake. The camera looks up from the bottom of their shoes as they reach the rooftop, panning over them as the sun rises. The clouds look heavily, as if painted gracefully. Louis and Paul joke like brothers, with Paul giving subtle hints of a final goodbye, disguised as questions of concern for his sister's well-being and taking pride in their mother's effort with the wedding. Paul finally confronts Louis about Lestat, saying he's evil and he's here to take souls. He even mentions that Lestat told him so without moving his lips. Lestat would go on to dismiss this, saying he's just got tricks. Paul would then say something that will hit Louis later. All mortal sins must be confessed. Louis again dismissed this topic of conversation by saying he'll never see Lestat again. Then, after a moment of silence, Paul stands up, glances once more at the sky, and says, "I love you, Louis." Louis, relaxed, taking in the sunrise, replies, "I love you too, baby brother." Paul would stand up and walk to the edge of the roof, and his last words being, "I think I ate too much chocolate cake." And then he falls, leaving Louis to witness the death of his brother. Every time I watch this episode, this scene gives me chills. Paul made sure to spend his last moments with Louis, his best friend, making sure they would exchange I love yous. The scene beautifully showcases the grief Louis felt after Paul's death in the book. In the book, Louis felt so guilty that he would lay next to Paul's corpse for days until it started to spore. The show portrayed the despair from the moment they climbed to the roof to the moment Paul fell, building on that energy until the end of the episode. I'd like to discuss this moment with Louis and a priest from the book and how the show may have adapted it in. I do believe Lestat replaces the priest in this scenario, but I'll get into that a little bit later. In the book, after Paul's death, Louis is laying in bed ill, and he has a conversation with the priest. Louis would attack the priest because he felt the priest was slandering his brother, accusing Paul of being possessed by the devil, causing Paul to do what he did. Louis would say, "It was then that I conceived of my own egotism. Perhaps I'd seen it reflected in the priest. His contemptuous attitude towards my brother reflected my own. His immediate and shallow carping about the devil, his refusal to even entertain the idea that sanctity had passed so close. Evil is always possible, and goodness is eternally difficult." In this episode, after Paul's funeral walk, it shows Louis' last call for redemption speaking with the priest in the confessional. He has multiple forms of guilt brewing inside of his soul. He confesses to all the sins he believes he's committed, from pimping, lying, stealing, and even laying with another man. The reason I believe this is paying a small homage to this moment in the book is because of one of the last things Paul ever said to Louis. All mortal sins must be confessed. To me, this reads as Louis acknowledging his own contempt for a brief moment, remembering some of the last words his brother ever spoke to him in an attempt to free himself of his pain, to relinquish his own ego and to be rectified. In the book, Louis sees becoming a vampire in two lights, one being simply enchantment, and the other being his wish for self-destruction and his desire to be thoroughly damned. I don't know, I could be overthinking it or overstretching it, but that's what I took from it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think this particular scene was referenced to the book? But going into why I think Lestat is a replacement for the priest is because Lestat's egotism is something that Louis does not like, thus reflecting his own egotism. But again, like I said, I could be overthinking it or I could be stretching it a bit. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Instead of Louis almost killing the priest, Lestat rips him out of the confessional booth, ripping him apart. Louis emerges from the booth and sets eyes on Lestat for what he truly is. Faced with Lestat ripping the priest apart, we see the disdain for God on Lestat's face. Louis, being too stunned to speak, immediately starts stabbing Lestat, which just annoys him. He speaks to Louis with rageful remarks, ridiculing Louis for his attempt to repent. Lestat basically says, "Do you really think God will hear your pleas through this dirty, egotistical mute sack? You see him as a beacon to communicate with God? How can you not see this as pathetic? How humiliating it is to believe such things." Louis is once again confronted with the brutality of death face to face. He goes on to call Lestat the devil, which Lestat would respond coldly with something like, "I'm not the devil, but I can bring you death." After obliterating the second priest, Lestat starts removing his bloody jacket, confronting Louis. You can tell the absence of Louis has been torturing him. He would begin his monologue by criticizing the US.
This primitive country has picked you clean. It has shackled you in permanent exile. Every room you enter, every hat you're forced to wear, the stern landlord, the deferential business.
His face showing so much contempt with a glimpse of pity for Louis, saying, "What rage you must feel as you choke on your own sorrow." While Louis slowly backs away from him, Lestat would say, "The first time I laid eyes on you, I saw your beauty and your sorrow all in one, making you so powerful. I can give you death. I can give you something God cannot." All the while, Louis lay in a church with two heavily ravaged corpses, and standing above him is a pleading, beach blonde, blood-drenched creature, and he musters up the words, "I love you." He begins pleading with Louis for a promise with life away from sorrows, and all Louis has to say yes. Lestat proposes to Louis that he would joyfully take his human life and replace it with a life of wonder. In the book, within his first moments of turning, Louis mentions, "From then on, I would experience increasing wonder." Referencing the name of the first episode, In Throes of Increasing Wonder, they included and incorporated a deeper look into Louis' mind, gaining a perspective into the psychological and emotional experience as he transitions into a vampire. Now as they lay at the altar of the church, covered in blood, votive candles illuminating the shadows, rain falling hard on the rooftops, Louis accepts Lestat's proposal. As the life is drained from Louis' body and replaced with Lestat's blood, Louis talks about the drums and discovers it was the sound of his heart beating with Lestat's heart. This is pretty much word from the book, so I'll go ahead and just quote the book here. The only difference is its delivery. It's a lot slower in the TV show and has a lot more emotion to it. But in the book, it goes, "And then there came the pounding of another drum, as if another giant were coming yards behind him. And each giant, intent on its own drum, gave no notice to the rhythm of the other. The sound grew louder and louder until it seemed to fill just my hearing, but all my senses, to be throbbing in my lips and fingers, in the flesh of my temples, in my veins." Awesome. Now on to my final thoughts. I feel like I've said all that needs to be said in terms of compare and contrast from the book of the series. I really am impressed with their attention to detail. There is quite a bit that's different from some of the aesthetics, but overall, in my personal opinion, yes, they executed the depths of the characters that Anne wrote. Lestat is Lestat, full of ego, elegance, and savagery, and Louis is Louis, full of self-destruction, empathy, and inner torment. I do enjoy some of the differences in the characters, such as Louis showing a harder exterior due to his occupation, the position he was put in as the older son to provide for his family, and even the relationship with his brother, even the death of his brother. Seeing the parallel relationships with God, Lestat, Paul, and Louis was really interesting to see. So overall, my opinion of the first episode of AMC's Interview with the Vampire has done an excellent job incorporating some of the minute details from the book itself and adapting it in ways that those who have read the book could see if they looked a little bit closer. Even if you haven't read the book, the show still does an excellent job displaying these characters in their truest form. But you let me know what you think. Well, this was super fun. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. If you've enjoyed this journey together and would like to see more deep dives analyzing the book to the show, or anything I might talk about, please leave me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of the installments. Until next time.
So much.
What about, I need heroes. I'm not good at normality or ordinary
Yeah, but
life.
your hero, he bites people.
My hero bites. Yes, he does. He does indeed.
He's
He's a
rats.
predator. He's a predator. That's right. Absolutely. But I feel that represents the predator in all of us and the dark side in all of us.